On March 20th, the Sun will finally ingress into his exalted temple of fiery cardinal energy, the zodiac sign of Aries. And this ingress will mark the spring equinox and symbolize the restart of the entire zodiacal year. Now, this transition from watery Pisces into fiery Aries will usher in a new overarching layer to our personal plot lines. And where that ushering in starts will be in the house where Aries sits in your personal charts. Now, as someone living up here in the northern hemisphere, I have to tell you, I do love me spring. I love the warming of the weather, how the exterior, the outdoors, becomes so much more welcoming and inviting and full of life. And I do appreciate the increase in daylight hours that I get to experience on a daily basis, because let's face it, I am but a plant with very complicated human emotions. More than that, I also love the underlying signature of potential that the astrology reflects at this time of year. And that signature is going to be colored by the co-presence of several planets already hanging out in the initial degrees of Aries, namely Neptune, Saturn, and Venus. The Sun will be interacting with each one of these planets slightly differently as he progresses through the 30 degrees of Aries, and that's where this video comes in. Hey there, and welcome back into my channel. If you're new here and we haven't been formally introduced, then hey, I'm Howie. I'm a professional reader of tarot and astrology. I'm a chronic non-reader of horror fiction in my spare time, and I'm a huge planning enthusiast. Because let's face it, something around here needs to help me keep all of these crazy trains of thoughts running on the tracks. In today's video, I'm going to be offering you some delineations and just some things to watch out for as the Sun moves into his exaltation of Aries, and also as he crosses paths with the planets that are already present in this fiery temple of Mars and the Sun. So go ahead and grab your journal or your planner, your favorite pens, maybe some stickers, and let's reflect upon the stars together. Now, much like Aries is the starting point of the zodiac, the Sun is our starting point for the purposes of this video. And what is the Sun but life purpose? The Sun can represent that ultimate goal, that thing that drives a native over the course of their life. This is the theme that the native will continue to pursue, almost magnetically be pulled towards as they progress through their life. And thus, from a literary perspective, you can look at the Sun as kind of like the plot line to the chart, the book of the native, the person for whom you are reading. This is why I mentioned overarching plot lines in the start of this video. Now, aside from that, you can get a little bit more granular with the Sun. In ancient texts, the Sun was often meant to represent kings. Even in a modern perspective, you can see leadership, governance, and oversight with the Sun. And developing that idea of oversight even more, again, we're thinking of the Sun, the light that brings us the day, that allows us to see, that allows us to wake. So there is illumination associated with the Sun, and that can also tie into the idea of intellect, of authenticity, of honesty, and of truth. But it's more than just basic honesty. The Sun represents source. From him, the rest of astrology comes from. Look at the Moon, for example. The Moon holds no light of her own, but she reflects the light of the Sun, and therefore she represents fortune or the material plane. The Sun represents spirit, the other side, where the gods reside. And from there you get this idea of ultimate truth, the truth that holds reality together. This is why the Sun finds his joy in the 9th house. Now, on top of that, you'll also find significations of youthfulness and enthusiasm and individuality in the Sun. The Sun is a central figure. There is the concept of centrality and focus with the Sun, a singularity, if you will. And because his movement through the sky is so predictable, you also get a sense of reliability and consistency. Moving on to the sign of Aries, the initiating cardinal energy of the entire zodiacal year. Remember that the Sun is exalted in Aries. Now, why is that? Well, If you look at what Aries represents, based on the fact that it is ruled by both the Sun and Mars, you get a sign that is all about individuality as well. This is also a sign that is very bold, very brave, very brazen. There is a short-temperedness to Aries on the shadow side, and that is because Aries is just full of life and eagerness that is ready to get things started, to initiate new projects. Think of where we are in the year, in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. Again, it is the spring equinox. Life is about to return to Earth. We've spent our time in Pisces planning and making choices and envisioning what this next zodiacal year is going to look like. Now is the time to actually start laying the foundation, the groundwork that will allow us to carry forth and see a fruitful harvest in the fall. And so this idea of starting things, initiating things, planting seeds is deeply rooted in Aries, and that comes from the Sun being this fatherly figure, the implanting of the seed through consummation, and Mars, this planet of passion and action and drive and ambition, the desire to go, the idea of desire itself. What do we desire? What do we need to start acting on? The idea of life returning to Earth also symbolizes the fact that the Sun will start breaching the horizon, and there will become a more dominating presence of light over darkness. We will start to see longer days. And so there's that idea of conquest, conquering and overcoming something. And then again, with the return of the light, illumination, visibility, presence, the need and desire to be seen, or to bring things around us into visibility. So on March 22nd, we are going to see the very first conjunction in Aries, and this is going to take place between the Sun and Neptune. Now, what could this possibly mean for us? When we see Neptune, this nebulous, abstract, dreamlike presence, connect with and open a dialogue with the Sun, the first image that really comes to mind for me is the diffusion of light. Take, if you will, a lamp, a light bulb, and you put a lampshade over it. That is Neptune being placed conjunct the Sun being that little light bulb, the individual very, very bright light. All of a sudden, the light is dimmed, it is diffused, it is spread out, and it's much easier to observe that light, to be in the presence of that light. It's not as harsh, it's not as jarring. Now we're in a more relaxing, dreamlike environment. And of course, this can express itself in a light way or a dark way. In the light way, it just makes the acquisition of knowledge, of truth, of receiving something that could typically be harsh and difficult to hold, more easy to accept. It opens us to be more receptive to harsh truths. Now, of course, on the shadow side of that, this could simply be us pulling the wool over our own eyes and escaping the reality of the situation before us. Pisces, which modern astrology attributes to Neptune, but Neptune itself as a planet can represent escapism, the idea of being unable to accept reality as it is and running off to create our own in our minds. So do be careful with the idea of illusory intelligence or illusory perspectives. Let's not lose sight of the truth of reality during this time. Now, because Neptune often represents this transcendental experience, and you have this coupled with the Sun representing kings, the father, this central figure in our lives, I also have this notion of deification. I say deification because honestly, some of the books that I've reviewed in my reading wrap-ups this year have actually dealt with this theme and concept of deifying our superiors or our ancestors. I'm thinking specifically of Maeve Fly and of Model Home. the language that some of the main characters use to describe their family members, their elders, really feels like something ritualistic, even cult-like. This is another signification where we have our light side and our shadow side. There is, of course, respect for the elders, respect for our ancestors, respect for our roots from where we came from, what shaped us to be who we are now, and how can we look back on our ancestral lineage to define and redefine our own self-image, our idea of self-identity? Or are we taking this too far? Are we taking this to a darker place and deifying someone who maybe doesn't quite deserve that level of exaltation? Are we raising someone up on a pedestal and placing expectations on them that are impossible to maintain and achieve? Are we being realistic about our heroes and heroines that we worship? Next, between the Sun and Neptune, there's also this idea of romanticizing intellectuality. We have the romantic part coming from Neptune, and we have the intellectual part coming from the Sun. So what type of intellectual discourse or discussions are we having that we're magnetically attracted to, that we're being pulled towards at this time? And speaking of magnetism, with the idea of hopes and dreams involved with Neptune, and then the Sun being our guiding light moving towards a life purpose, we might actually be exploring brand new aspirations, but aspirations that like really grab onto us, really grab us by the throat and just take us for a ride. Think hyperfixations. Hyperfixations might be juggled at this time, so let's be careful to pace ourselves with these new projects, especially given what's coming up just after that, and that will be Saturn conjunct the Sun just 3 days later on March 25th. Now, I want to kind of put these two concepts and compare them side by side, because Neptune and Saturn are kind of like antithetical to one another. Whereas Neptune likes to dream and float, and there's no form or structure to him, he's very directionless, Saturn is kind of the opposite. Saturn is the definition of structure, of regimen, and of rigidity in astrology. And so you have this point in time where we are dreaming big, we are reaching for the stars, and then 3 days later, we might just get hit with a really hard brick wall of a reality check. So do keep that in mind as we move through this upcoming week into Aries season. Now, when we think of the Sun and Saturn, we have a double dose of fatherly figures, the heads of households, the heads of organizations and enterprises. Saturn can also represent the father. However, his perspective comes from a space of age, maturity, and ancient wisdom, whereas the Sun is more youthful and open to new ideas. So that might be a clash that happens, especially in a sign like Aries, which is all about newness, a fresh season. And this is why Saturn experiences his fall or his depression in Aries. So if we are careful, we can actually find our footing. After we've done our exploration with Neptune conjunct the Sun, with Saturn present, we might actually be able to find a really solid framework, some sort of new structure to help us move forward with these new ideas. Now, I will say this may require editing, cutting back, and letting some things go. I know it's really fun to dream big, it's really fun to do those vision boards, but let's face it, there's only 24 hours in a day, and not all of us have the same 24 hours, let me tell you. So you want to keep in mind your own vitality levels, your own constitution, that's the Sun, and make sure it fits into the limitations, Saturn, that are presented to you when you examine how you want to approach your new projects and your new ideas. This could also be a point where we start figuring out a new role that may have been assigned to us. And I'm thinking of restructuring happening on a much wider world stage. This could be restructuring in your career, a restructuring in your family, a restructuring in just your creative pursuits, your hobbies. What is your new role, and how can you step up to the plate to really embrace that new role? Is there new education or new knowledge that you need to acquire? Is there a mentor that you can turn to acquire old wisdom from someone who's done this before and bring that into the present to help you move forward? Now, remember what I said about that dichotomy between the sun being a new type of rulership and Saturn being the old ways of doing things and overseeing things. We might end up seeing a struggle with passing on the torch in some cases. So keep an eye out for that as well. And then, of course, Saturn is a planet of separation. He rules the opposition aspect in all of astrology. He is dualities and dichotomies incarnate. So he pulls things apart. Whereas Neptune will dissolve and merge things together, Saturn will pull those apart so that we are forced to examine often oppositional forces in the same situation or structure. And we have to consider that shadow side and that light side in order to progress. And so we might end up finding strength in isolation. You may need to step back from big social groups in order to do some personal growth, do some self-exploration of your identity. Again, thinking back to what new roles are you being presented with? Do you need to step into a new role somewhere? Do you need to be the leadership that you yourself require? Do you need to be that guiding force you wish you had a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for example? So there may be some folks out there who will need to experience a dark night of the soul, a period of quiet solitude and isolation, in order to examine and take advantage of their inner strengths. Now, one last thing that I want to touch on before we get to the horoscopes is Venus. Now, I mentioned Venus is co-present in Aries, and that is true. However, the sun will not actually catch up to her to form a proper conjunction. He's never going to be in engagement range with Venus. By the time he reaches the later degrees of Aries, she's already going to be sitting pretty and comfortable in her domicile of Taurus. But because we're looking at whole sign house astrology, that is the practice that I follow, her presence in Aries still has some sort of effect. She is still able to have a dialogue with the sun. It's just not going to be as loud or as forceful as his dialogue with Saturn or Neptune. If we look at the fainter, more subtle delineations here, Venus co-present the sun in Aries, which is her exile. She is on the opposite side of the chart from her home in Libra. We may see creative sprints, focused periods on aesthetics, and not physical or tangible aesthetics. This isn't an earth sign. We're in a fire sign. So this feels more like soul searching. This is the aesthetics of the soul, the spirit, and the character. Again, we're dealing with the sun, which is identity, self-identity. This might be an examination of our interpersonal relationships and our role within those interpersonal relationships. Finding independence in those relationships, whether they be sexual, romantic, or platonic. This could also put a focus on femininity. So sisters, mothers, women and femmes in our lives in general. How do we relate to the concept of femininity? And when you look at the genders in astrology, we're not talking about man and woman. We're talking about active versus passive. We're talking about receptivity and process-oriented thinking versus impulsivity and quick action, forward momentum. And so how can we maybe temper this solar desire to go, move forward with a more passive, gentler, and thoughtful way of doing things where Venus is co-present here? We may end up forming brand new connections. We're in a sign that is all about cardinal energy, so initiation, that help us find our ambitions and find our passions. And I'm thinking back to what I said about Neptune and the sun. I would be wary of turning a new connection into a hyperfixation. Let's not take it that far. But there could be really crucial information that will help us pursue a new life purpose in our interpersonal connections. Is there anything in those relationships that you may need to start or restart? And Venus in Aries, despite the fact that she's in exile, does bring a very fiery self-assuredness to the table. This is a femininity that is like the lioness. She stands up for herself, and she is unafraid of standing alone for a cause that she cares about. There is passion here. Aries is all about desire. It is ruled by Mars, and thus, what do we desire, and where might we see ourselves needing to stand alone in order to achieve that desire? A key thing to remember here with Venus and the Sun interacting as well is Venus is actually never going to be under the beams of the sun while she's in Aries, and thus she is not going to suffer from being overshadowed or overpowered by the sun. This is really key. Oftentimes when we see planets that are under the beams, the sun just overtakes them unless they're in their chariot, a domicile or an exaltation. Here, Venus would really suffer to be heard and to be seen. The concept of visibility is very integral to the idea of being under the beams. So here she's not invisible. She is still very much present. She is still very much able to speak her mind. And so that's what I mean insofar as there's a subtlety to her dialogue with the sun in Aries. Now, I wanted to showcase my horoscopes a little bit differently this time. I have this Star Codes Astro Oracle deck. This deck is by Heather Roan Robbins, and I've showcased these cards before. I use them in my astrology videos a lot. The artwork is beautiful. As you can clearly see, it is gorgeous. And I just don't use this Oracle deck as often as I would like. So as a visual aid for this video, I thought I'd pull out all of the signs and all of the houses, and we'll go through each horoscope for each rising sign one at a time. And so if you are an Aries rising, this is happening in your first house, which means this interaction with Saturn, Neptune, and Venus's co-presence has to do with you yourself, how you self-identify, your character, how you present yourself to other people. So the search for self-identity and maybe redefining your self-identity is going to be more prominent if you are an Aries rising. If you're a Taurus rising, that puts Aries in your 12th house. And so these interactions with the planets are going to influence your subconscious, your blind spots. The 12th house is not aspecting the first house, and so often we'll find secrets and hidden things in the 12th. This can be hidden enemies or hidden misfortune. This can also mean isolation, and we've spoken about isolation earlier in this video. And so in this moksha house, how are you going to need to step up and be brave in the face of subterfuge, of self-sabotage tendencies? Isolation can be helpful when it is quiet, intentional, reflective solitude. How can you ensure that you are giving yourself that space without taking too much and falling too far into that isolated state of mind? If you're a Gemini rising, then you're going to have Aries and all of these aspects happening in your 11th house. Now, this is the house of social alliances and friendships. But more than that, this is also a house of benefactors. Anything that happened in the 11th typically is there to support the 10th, your career, your social reputation. And so you'll also find hopes, aspirations, and goals in the 11th, which we spoke a lot about at the start of this video. So you are really going to be focused on defining and redefining your aspirations and your goals during this Aries season. If you're a Cancer rising, you will find these aspects happening in your 10th house, which, as I just mentioned, is the house of career. This is the house of your public face, your reputation, how the wider world stage sees you. And so you can see the depiction of this card. Where is Neptune taking you? What heights is Neptune showing you when it comes to your life purpose and your overall direction? And then where can Saturn show you the footholds and the structure to ensure you are making a meaningful and worthwhile climb, and that you're not just letting your head get lost in the clouds? For all my Leo risings, this is going to be happening in the 9th house. And this is the joy of the sun. So a lot of the 9th house significations have to do with solar themes. Here we see travel, foreign and international experiences. There's a wide vision, a wide berth to the 9th house. This is where we find personal beliefs, those higher truths. Again, the stuff that holds reality together. You'll often hear people talk about the 9th house as representing higher education, but not higher education like college and university, PhD stuff, more like the sciences, the maths, the physics. Like I said, the stuff that holds reality together. And let's not forget that the sun also rules Leo. And so you are going to have a first house flavor to these aspects regardless, because the sun is still tied to your self-identity. So that examination and those pursuits that have to do with self-identity might be even stronger, louder for all my Leo risings. And it could very well be deeply tied into any international or foreign experiences that you have planned in this season, or that you will plan this season. Now, of course, you might find religion and spirituality in the 9th house. So if that speaks to you and what is an important part of your life already, how is that going to be re-examined, and what new projects will you be starting in those life aspects? For Virgo, if you're a Virgo rising, this is happening in your 8th house. This is another house that does not aspect the first, and so often we'll see other blind spots here too. But more than that, the 8th is about commitments and consequences, debts and inheritances, and also others' resources. This is the 2nd house derived from the 7th, and so these are the resources of the spouse, as an example. Here we find our karmic soul contracts and our commitments to other people. So, are you signing on to any new karmic soul contracts in Aries season? Are any chapters closing and new chapters beginning between you and your commitments to the other? Let's keep in mind that Neptunian presence. Let's not sign on for more than we can handle. Let's not bite off more than we can chew, okay? For all my Libra risings, this is happening in your 7th house, the relationship house. This is the house of the other. This is a house of pleasure, of rest. Here is where the sun sets. And so what do we do at the end of the day? We relax and we rejoice. This is a house of consummation, of endings and closure, but typically enjoyable ones, pleasurable ones. So what are your one-on-one interactions looking like? And more so than that, what is your spouse's or your partner's life looking like? Oftentimes in these houses that signify the other, we may not actually be involved in anything happening here. This could just be us witnessing and observing and making space for someone else who is going through that particular aspect. Moving on to Scorpio risings. This will be in your 6th house of discipline. This is often known as the house of bad fortune. However, it is the joy of Mars. And so what is Mars but desire and action? So if you need a dose of discipline in order to get shit done, this is where we're going to start examining that. We have the initiating energy of Aries. We have Neptune with his big dreams and his hopes and aspirations. But more importantly, we've got Saturn, who is that dose of maturity that sometimes we need in order to find a good rhythm, a good routine that's going to help us achieve our goals. More so than that, you can also find physical health here. hard labor, and subordinates if you work in that type of job, or household pets, small animals. For all my Sagittarius risings, all my fellows out there who share my rising sign, sound off in the comments. We're going to be experiencing these aspects in our 5th house. And this is the joy of Venus. This is a house of personal pleasure, of creativity. Stuff that happens in the 5th often helps support the 4th, the home, the resting point, our most inner secretive self. And so what adventurous creative pursuits are we going to be taking on during Aries season? And what does that mean for our overall life direction? How can we ensure we are incorporating fun into our personal projects? Remember, Saturn is present here. He brings a bit of a dry old man type of energy to the table. So fun is important, but let's not let that get overblown. Let's not let that Neptunian presence suck all of our attention span towards something frivolous. We need to make sure we're still putting in energy into stuff that matters for the overall life direction. You might also find children in the 5th house too. So if children are a very important aspect of your life, how can you look to the childlike innocence and wonder of those around you and incorporate that into your life? Are new children coming into your life, into your family, your lineage? How is that happening? For my Capricorn risings, this will be happening in your 4th house of home, of the past, and of our familial and ancestral karma. The 4th house is our innermost life. It is the lowest point of the chart. It is subterranean and dark. And so this is a space we don't always let other people into and witness. So is there something that needs to be let out, that needs to be spoken out loud and addressed? Where is Aries lighting this fire? Where is the sun showing an illuminating need to bring something to the surface during Aries season? Next up, we have Aquarius risings. This will be happening in your 3rd house. The 3rd house is the house of community. This is a reflection of the 4th. And what is the reflection of the home but the neighborhood? So neighbors, those familiar places that you visit often, our smaller communities, our smaller municipalities. Whereas the 9th is overall governance of a whole country, for example. Here we're getting a little bit more granular. This is much more closer to home. This is also a space of communication, of technology, because in modern day, how do we communicate with one another? And so with Aries here and all of these planets interacting, how are we finding new ways to communicate? Are there any new technologies coming in? Do you have any new ideas for technologies of your own that can help your community, your neighborhood, and how you communicate to others? And last but not least, we have our Pisces risings in the chat. So Pisces, this is going to be happening in your 2nd house of personal resources, whereas the 8th is the others. These are your own. The 2nd house essentially nourishes the 1st. So this is anything sort of tangible and material. Yes, it can be money, but let's not forget that food nourishes us. Also, what sort of skills do we need that help feed our character, our soul, ourselves? Are there any new ways to create more material wealth in your life that is coming forth in Aries season? Do you need to add some form of structure to what is already there? Are there any investments that need to be re-examined and restarted at this time? And of course, is there any sort of skill development that we need to get a little bit more serious about in order to see fruition, in order to see results? And there you have it, folks. These are just some brief horoscopes for all of you in 2026's Aries season. And I sincerely hope you were able to glean some wisdom and insight to help you prepare for the next 30 days. I highly encourage you to take some time to reflect upon any notes you've taken and any questions you've written down in order to gain the most out of this type of video and these horoscopes. And as always, if you're even more curious to know what your birth chart has to say about you in any season of life, then by all means, I invite you to join me over on Instagram. The link to my profile will be down below in the description, and here's where you can book your own personal one-on-one consultation with yours truly. I offer astrology readings and tarot readings, and I cannot wait to have a one-on-one dialogue with you about what the stars have to say about your life thus far and what is to come moving forward. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you for tuning into my videos. Thank you all so much for being here. Don't forget to take care of yourselves and each other, especially in times like these. Bye-bye.